Hello, welcome to your academy. At your academy today, we will deal with Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This lecture is again being recorded on demand. If you also have any topic in mind that you want us to deliver a lecture upon, you can write us in the comment section of any video on your academy. We will do our best to come back with a lecture on your demand. Coming to the Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It's a work which was published in 1817. Now, if we look back at the Romantic age, there are two important works which highly influenced the critical writing, or writing in the field of criticism in Romantic age. And initially it was the preface to lyrical ballads written by William Wordsworth, and later it was Biographia Literaria written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now, when we try to read Biographia Literaria, we find it as an introduction that this would be somewhat autobiographical work by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. However, an in-depth study of this work reveals that it's not merely an autobiographical work, but it is more of a philosophical work written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. As we know, both William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they were the leading poets of the first generation of Romantic poets, and they made their name highly in the field of poetry. But both these writers, Wordsworth and Coleridge, influenced the literary criticism also, or wrote in the field of literary criticism also. As I mentioned earlier, William Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads gave us some new perceptions and new ideas and new concepts about poetry and composition of poetry, as well as about poet. And Biographia Literaria, when it is read in context of English literature, also throws light on these aspects of poetry, poet, and criticism. Well, when it comes to Biographia Literaria, it's a voluminous book consisting of more than 20 chapters. But if you are a student of English literature, you do not mostly deal with all 20 or 22 odd chapters of Biographia Literaria. More than that, in Biographia Literaria, a student of English literature deals with 3-4 chapters from this book. And commonly chapter number 13, chapter 14, and chapter 18 are the works which concerns the student of English literature at the initial level. Therefore, in this lecture also, we would be focusing upon these three chapters, or the contents of these three chapters, that is chapter 13, chapter 14, and chapter 18. But before we take up these chapters individually and try to understand what Samuel Taylor Coleridge has to say, it's important that few introductory things be told about Biographia Literaria. When Biographia Literaria was written, it was not received well by the commentators and by the critics. T.S. Eliot also found this work lethargic in nature, and many of the readers of Biographia Literaria would end up not writing good things or good reviews about Biographia Literaria. And the debate about it being an autobiographical work or a philosophical work also went down the line, and there are people who say that it's not Samuel Taylor Coleridge who is present in this work, but it is his philosophy and ideas. Therefore, we just won't be happy, or it won't be a right statement to make that Biographia Literaria would be, for that matter, an autobiographical work. If you want to just divide this whole book, Biographia Literaria, from thematic perspective and try to look out for that what are the major contents of this book, you will come across three things which prevail in the Biographia Literaria at large, and they are: A statement of Coleridge's principles in politics, religion, philosophy, and literary theory. B. A philosophic investigation of the principles governing poetry and criticism. C. The practical application of these biographia literaria principles once established to the poetry and poetic theory of Wordsworth. Now, these would be the three broad areas which biographia literaria concerns, except the first one, wherein the philosophy, the politics, and other things are being talked about by by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. B and C, which I discussed earlier, they deal with poetry, with criticism, with theory of poetry, and ends with the name of William Wordsworth. Now, I'll be slightly focusing upon William Wordsworth here, because when you will read this book, Biographia Literaria, you will find the presence of William Wordsworth in it. There are two reasons why William Wordsworth seems to be omnipresent in Biographia Literaria. Is one, he was the friend of William Wordsworth, and we know Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth together published lyrical ballads initially, and they were very good friends. And later, when William Wordsworth wrote preface to the lyrical ballads, and when he gave his ideas about poetry, Samuel Taylor Coleridge would take an exception to those ideas of William Wordsworth, whether it was regarding the definition of poetry, whether it was regarding the use of meter, whether it was regarding the use of diction, which were three prominent issues with which Wordsworth concerns in preface to lyrical ballads. Now, when it comes to Biographia Literaria, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, on the one side, talks good about William Wordsworth, but refutes most of the ideas of William Wordsworth, which he had written in preface to the lyrical ballads. So when we would study these chapters 13, 14, and 18, we'll again find the presence of William Wordsworth in those chapters. Now, that was a general outline of Biographia Literaria. But if we stick to these chapters with which we would be dealing in these lectures, that is 13, 14, and 18, it is better at the beginning to draw a general outline of these chapters. When it comes to chapter 13 and 14, critics say that these are the most complex chapters written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with less clarity in it and less completion in it also. But therefore, you will find that it becomes very difficult in comprehending if you start reading the text of Biographia Literaria chapter 13, 14, and others. Therefore, even summarizing it would be difficult. But a general consensus surrounds that chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria primarily deals with the ideas of poetic creation, how poetry is written. And in this regard, chapter 13 would be talking about imagination and fancy. Though we know that Samuel Taylor Coleridge wanted to write an extensive account of imagination and fancy, but somewhat it is said, Coleridge himself states that I received a letter, though that letter was not received from any friend, but says Coleridge, it was written by me, and I did not lift the pen while I was writing that, except for dipping it in the ink box. But that letter somehow, made Samuel Taylor Coleridge to abruptly stop his account of imagination and fancy. Therefore, we find that chapter 13 would be, ending abruptly by just giving us the definitions of imagination and fancy. And in imagination, there are those famous distinctions between primary imagination and secondary imagination. Now, when we will deal with chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria, we would look at the definitions and use of imagination, primary and secondary, as well as fancy. When it comes to chapter 14, now chapter 14 again has not got a lot of content, except it would be a refute to William Wordsworth's ideas about poetry and poet. We know from Preface to Lyrical Ballads that William Wordsworth defined poetry and defined poet. So here in chapter 14, Samuel Taylor Coleridge would be giving us his opinions about poetry and poet. And then coming to chapter 18, in chapter 18, Samuel Taylor Coleridge would deal with the ideas of meter and diction, which was for that matter a point of disagreement between Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now that was a slight outline of what we would be looking at in chapter 13, 14 and 18. Now coming back to the chapter number 13, it primarily deals with primary imagination, secondary imagination and fancy. Now what is primary imagination? Now when Samuel Taylor Coleridge talks about primary imagination, he says that primary imagination is inborn, which means that it's a common faculty among all human beings, which means that you, me, every third person in the universe has the faculty of primary imagination. Now this primary imagination, says Samuel Taylor Coleridge, resides in the subconscious part of our mind, in the subconscious section of our mind, and anything that is perceived by human beings, anything that we see and understand and react is through primary imagination. And the task of primary imagination is not the recreation. Taylor Coleridge explains the function of primary imagination as primary imagination is a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. Now when it comes to this definition or function of primary imagination, mostly students find it very difficult to understand because the diction, the choice of word and the rhetoric that Coleridge uses is difficult. For example, he uses two words, finite and infinite, and then ends this statement by I am. Now we need to look up at these words, as he says that it's a repetition in the finite mind. Repetition in the finite mind. What does this mean? As I said earlier, that primary imagination is present in every human being. So it's an act which would be repeated everywhere, which would be functioning on repetition, but where? In the finite mind. What does finite mind refer to here? Finite mind here refers to the mind of human beings. Finite means, faculty which is limited, which is not unlimited. So primary imagination at one place acts at finite level, as it is an inborn faculty told by Taylor Coleridge already to us, available in every human being, whether he's learned, he's not learned, he's educated, he's uneducated, he's rich, he's poor. As long as he is sane, perhaps he has primary imagination. I don't know about insane, maybe it would be available in them too. So it functions at finite level, at finite mind. Its we would say scope would be limited, but the second part of this definition says of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. Now this infinite would link the act of this primary imagination with God, with creation, with other things. So very strangely, what Coleridge would be doing is would be linking this primary imagination at one end with the human beings, at another end with God. Now, how does it relate to these two things? That is finite at one level and infinite at another level. At finite level, it comes up with the word repetition, which would be interpreted with, Coleridge himself tells us in an analog manner. This analog manner is like this way. If you draw lines on the page of paper like this, so they move in one sequence, and there is a kind of continuity also in them, and they move in zigzag manner. But there is a generative activity also associated with this finite activity, and the infinite I am, or the eternal infinite I am, refers to that generative quality of the primary imagination, which would mean that primary imagination, as long as man is alive, is not or does not become extinct. So the finiteness of the primary imagination relates to the limited scope or function of primary imagination, which is, as I said earlier, not to create but to perceive. Like you are seeing me, understanding me, or you see any image, reflect on that image, but you are not going to create anything new from that image. That is the limited or finiteness of the primary imagination. But the continuity that the continuity of generativeness, a generative characteristic feature of primary imagination, makes it infinite. So just to come out of this highly philosophic statement of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, what we can say about primary imagination in brief is that it's a general faculty available in all human beings, is inborn, and all the human beings make use of primary imagination in their daily life. And it resides, as per Samuel Taylor Coleridge, in subconscious mind. You need not put too much of an efforts in utilizing the primary imagination. But that then comes the secondary imagination. First up, secondary imagination would be poetic imagination. When secondary imagination is poetic imagination, that means secondary imagination is not a common imagination, is not a common faculty. So the first distinction between primary imagination and secondary imagination would be that primary imagination is general, secondary imagination is not so general. It's not inborn. Everybody does not have secondary imagination. There are only few people who have secondary imagination. But there are some other things that Coleridge says about secondary imagination. He says that secondary imagination does not differ from primary imagination in kind, but in degree. Now, this statement that it does not differ in kind reflects that secondary imagination is not a different or second faculty available in human beings, which would say that human beings do not have two kind of imaginations or two different kind of imaginations, because secondary imagination does not differ in kind, it only differs in degree. What does this mean? This means there are some people who have common primary imagination, and there are other people who have a higher level of primary imagination. So secondary imagination basically would be primary imagination, but it would be an elevated part of the primary imagination, a heightened part of the primary imagination, an improved part of the primary imagination, and that improved part of the primary imagination would be secondary imagination. Therefore, secondary imagination does not differ in kind. It's not a different thing. It's not a second thing in your mind. It's only the first thing, but enhanced, improved, better in degree. That's secondary imagination. Now, that's another distinction between primary and secondary imagination. And the third distinction, wherein this secondary imagination would differ from primary imagination, is Coleridge says that it coexists with conscious mind. Now, what we read earlier was that primary imagination resides in subconscious mind. Secondary imagination coexists with conscious mind. It does not reside in conscious mind but coexists with conscious mind. Now, since it is there in conscious mind, therefore its task could also be active in nature. For example, primary imagination does not create, secondary imagination creates. So the function of secondary imagination is not just to see things and forget things, but to see things and act upon them consciously, and when they do act, they create. So the function of secondary imagination is creation, to create. It's a poetic imagination. Now, why is it poetic imagination? If a common man, for example, sees daffodils, primary imagination tells him that these are daffodils. Fine, the experience is over. But when poet sees daffodils, he writes a poem called Daffodils, as Wordsworth did. Wordsworth had a higher degree of primary imagination called the secondary imagination. And when he saw the daffodils, what he did, he put together the subconscious and conscious and created something out of this experience, out of this perception, and that's a poem. So what secondary imagination does, it creates. Primary imagination does not create anything. So Coleridge defines secondary imagination as, the secondary imagination is described as a power that dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate. So what it does, dissolves, diffuses and dissipates in order to recreate. As I said earlier, secondary imagination recreates. But what does it diffuse or dissolve or dissipate? Obviously the objects, the subjects that we saw, which most of the men take for granted. As I gave you the example of the daffodils. When you see the daffodils, nothing happens, except you in the contemporary times may go and take a selfie along with the daffodils, and there would be no effect of the daffodils upon you, except perhaps you will give a cute smile standing beside the daffodils, or for that matter give an exclamation, wow, they are so beautiful, and it would end here. Not for the secondary imagination. They would return back and take that subject that primary imagination put there in their subconscious mind, take that from subconscious mind into the conscious mind, act upon that, diffuse, dissolve, dissipate, and a poem comes into the being. So secondary imagination's function is to create. Primary imagination's function is not to create. Now, after describing primary and secondary imagination, Coleridge comes to fancy. And with regards to fancy, he does not have much to say about it. Now, in discussing fancy, he talks about imagination and fancy. He does not talk about secondary, primary imagination, secondary imagination, and fancy. Fancy would be distinguished from imagination, not specifically either from secondary imagination or primary imagination. Here, Coleridge would distinguish fancy from imagination. Now, when he distinguishes fancy from imagination, he says that fancy's task is not to create. It does not act like secondary imagination of dissolving, diffusing, or dissipating. No. It's just a form of memory. It's a kind of storehouse. Now, say for example, you saw daffodils. You went back home. The experience is over. It is stored in some part of your brain. The task of fancy is only to remind you of that one experience. So therefore, Coleridge would define fancy as that it's a mode of memory receiving all its material ready-made from the law of association. So it's a mode of memory and it's receiving all things ready-made. Ready-made from whom? Who makes those things? Primary imagination. Primary imagination is present in everyone, with which we see things, realize things, understand things, put them in some corner of our mind, and then fancy would get access to those ready-made materials in our mind. So they function as the modes of memory. Therefore, fancy would differ from imagination in kind, not in degree. Initially the statement about secondary imagination was made that secondary imagination does not differ in kind but in degree. But fancy differs in kind, not in degree, because now it's a different faculty than imagination. Its task is different and it coexists with the imagination. Its task is to recall. Therefore, fancy is not poetic, which means it does not create. You can say, for example, is primary imagination and fancy one and the same thing? Probably yes, but not. Probably yes, but not. Why? Because primary imagination does not have ready-made material. Primary imagination produces the material for this fancy, which fancy accesses at some other point of time when one is sitting leisure at home. And when these three faculties blend together, primary imagination, fancy, and secondary imagination, poetry comes into the existence. First, one would make use of primary imagination. He sees the daffodils, goes back home at night, and that daffodil, the scenes of the daffodils exist in some part of the mind, in some part of the memory. Fancy is activated and it brings that daffodil into the conscious mind. When it comes to the conscious mind, in the conscious mind, secondary imagination will start operating and perhaps you will start writing the poetry. So all these things put together make poetry, but fancy alone does not create. It's not poetic. Let me give you an example how fancy and imagination differ. Now, what fancy does, say for example, you have two metals. One is tin and the other is copper. What you do, you put both of them together, fine, and make a rod. Now the rod, which is made of tin and of copper, is not a new thing. It's a rod which consists half of tin and half of copper. But what imagination does, and particularly the secondary imagination, it functions like, for example, it has got tin and it has got copper. Now what it would do, it would melt the tin and copper, diffuse, dissipate, put them in fire and let them go through a rigorous operation, through a rigorous process, and it ends up creating bronze. Now this bronze metal, which is created out of the tin and amalgamation of the tin and the copper, is a new thing. So what fancy does, it just brings tin and copper, puts them together. You have a thing consisting of tin and copper. But what imagination does, it does not do this. It creates bronze out of tin and copper. Now that's a general distinction of fancy and imagination. Now that was about chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria. It deals with primary imagination and secondary imagination. Now since the lecture has been a long one, I would stop here. In the next lecture, we will talk about chapter 14 and chapter 18. That is all we have at Your Academy for today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to share, like, comment and subscribe Your Academy. For more interesting stuff, keep watching Your Academy.